So this passage is from chapter 6 in the novel, titled Wool Between the Slats. And it is essentially, the main character has discovered that this cult leader who has basically adopted her and has a large following, he has these magical powers, these mystical powers, and he kills people with them and he resurrects people with them. And she has recently discovered that he actually is not the one resurrecting people, that there is a creature in the house that has this ability and that he's using this creature to do so. So this is after Jack, the main character, has figured out that this being is in the basement and she's trying to communicate with it on, they're each on the other side of a door. For the next 2 days, I thought upon the fact that I had been able to get past the more challenging of the two doors, and I tried to decipher a way to unlock the wooden door and see whatever was inside. I considered asking Roland if he might be willing to train me, or find someone who could train me in picking locks. Almost immediately, I realized this would hinder more than help, as Roland would invariably ask why I wanted to learn how to pick locks. It was hardly the best option. I marched through the mansion, thinking, pondering. I pictured the wooden door again, the wavering light hitting my shoes like the waves on a pool in the calm early evening. A brilliant idea hit me. I might not need to open the door. It wasn't that I necessarily needed to enter the room or that the being inside needed to come out. It was only important that something would be able to go into the room and return. The gap between the bottom of the door and the brick floor was 2 inches. I could slip something small like a letter, or even something a little bit larger, maybe a 100-page book, or even, say, a mirror, beneath the door frame with no problem. There could be another form of communication, a creative way around the roadblock. Then an even better idea applied its way into my brain. If he was indeed the one who could resurrect the dead, I might be able to bring something small to him and have him resurrected. My heart leapt at the possibility. I could very well witness, via the small crack between the door and the floor, a miniature miracle. A grasshopper or a snake would be small enough to fit beneath the door frame. As I was walking along a corridor, though, I came across something better than any grasshopper or snake or cricket or cicada or toad. 3 dozen red roses glowed in a white and silver vase. Their edges were just beginning to blacken, the drooping petals showing the barest signs of their inevitable death. I plucked a limp red flower from the vase and gazed upon it. It could work. Swiftly, I carried it upstairs and hid it beneath my bed. I did not want the flower simply limp when I brought it to him. I wanted it dead, dried, and crackling. I demanded the miracle as miraculous as it could be. Several days passed, and the flower shriveled and dried. The smell of the fragrant rot intensified, and I wrinkled my nose every time I smelled it. By the end of the week, it was exactly what I needed. Thin, fragile, and as light as a feather. The night of the 7th day, I was laying in bed with plans of carrying the flower down to the basement as soon as Cyrus tucked me in. When he entered my room, he was dressed in a coat and shoes, ready to go out. I asked him, "Are you going somewhere?" He nodded. It was late, and that confused me. "Where?" "To check on the other children, see how they are doing," he said. "Oh, are they sick?" No, Cyrus smiled. Every Monday evening, a few more children arrive, and I have to go and meet them. I thought of the many rooms in Cyrus's house and did not understand why Cyrus would need to leave at all. "Why don't they live here?" I asked. "Only the lucky ones live here. Alex is a lucky one. You are a lucky one." "And what are they?" Cyrus's eyes shifted. "They are almost lucky." "You would rather be lucky, yes?" I nodded. "That's all that matters. Time to go to sleep." He patted my arm once and rose from the bed. He walked to the door and turned back to wink. He left. I waited, watching the clock. 20 minutes passed. That should have given him enough time to leave. It was a good time for sneaking. I slipped my shoes on, retrieved the dead rose from beneath my bed, and moved to my door. I opened it, peered out, and made sure no one else was in the hallway. After several minutes of silence and stillness, I quietly exited and shut my door behind me. I tiptoed to the end of the hall, to the left past the balcony, and down the stairs. Soon, I again faced the wooden door that led to the basement, card in hand. I took several deep breaths before placing my hand on the door handle. Trepidation sped my heart, but I was used to trepidation and used to a speeding heart. These sensations did not stop me. I reached the lower level in no time, skipping past the wine. I grabbed a bottle from the island, slipped the white card into the slot above the door's handle. I pulled the door open, set the bottle of wine against it again, and entered the familiar red hallway. I crept to the wooden door, my pulse thumping in my ears, and bent toward the flickering light beneath it. When I dropped the rose to the brick, its petals fractured and made a delicious crunching sound. I shoved the crumbling petals through the gap under the door so that only half of the long green stem remained visible. The sound of petals scraping against the floor could not be ignored, not in that quiet hallway. Believing that whoever was inside had to have heard it, I searched for a shadow. I waited, giddy with anticipation. Something shifted on the other side of the door. There was the sound of footsteps. "It's me," I said, when something approached. Realizing I had never introduced myself, I said, "My name is Jack. I was here a few days ago. I thanked you for resurrecting Roland." Slowly, a shadow blocked the light from beneath the door, and the rose stem edged its way under and disappeared without a sound. The shadow quietly vanished, and all that was left was the flickering, shimmering light on the red brick. I gulped, a tad embarrassed. I stammered and asked if he could bring the rose back to life. "You don't have to if you don't want to," I said, "but I would just like to see it happen, because it's amazing." Near one of my bare feet, the tip of the rose's stem came into view. I slowly withdrew the stalk. The plumpest, healthiest rose slipped between the door and the floor. The enormous bloom flared open as I righted the flower. The blossom pulsated with life, larger and fleshier than it had been 4 days before. It was more real, more alive than any rose could be. It was not simply resurrected. It was improved, pure crimson beauty. I had found him, the being who helped Cyrus bring Roland back to life, who could bring me back if needed. What had Roland said? Anyone at any time? The rose's phenomenal scent was strong and sweet. "So beautiful," I sighed as I brushed the ruby petals against my nose. "Thank you." Trying the knob once more, I found the door was still locked, and solidly so. Knowing I should not linger too long, I said, "Good night, whoever you are," and made my way back down the hall, glancing once more at the miraculous monster's doorway. "I'll be back later." I clasped the rose to my chest as I crept back to my room, and I slept with it on my pillow beside me. That night, as I rested, I dreamed I was eating a piece of pie with bits of apple wrapped in petals. There had never existed any food so delicious. I brought that rose back to the man on several Mondays after, excitedly awaiting each evening that Cyrus would be away, checking on the other children. Each time the man beyond the door quietly transformed the flower and returned it to me, my skin flushed and my heart bloomed as large as the rose. The miraculous process became a weekly habit. Then, another strange, delightful idea hit me. After breakfast one morning, I placed my empty bowl of cereal in the sink and left for the sitting room in the back of Cyrus's mansion, the one where Thornton had been killed. I slipped into the den. I had not been inside the room before. The need to investigate the place where Cyrus had used the box had never called to me. The truth was that I had tried to avoid it. Now, I ignored any fear, glided into the room quietly, and shut the door. No window shades were drawn, and it enhanced the blankness of the room. The den floors were hardwood, and the wood was terribly white. It was solidly furnished with sofas, a chase lounge, a piano, several bureaus and buffets. An empty birdcage near one of the tall windows was bordered by lush satin curtains. At one time, those curtains had likely been light blue with gold stripes, just like in some of the other rooms. The couches had perhaps been a soft cream, the molding gold, the birdcage a bright electric silver. The entire room, like the rest of Cyrus's mansion, must have been arrestingly elegant. It wasn't brilliant now. Rather, it was like the White Room. The image of Cyrus dragging Thornton into that very room by his hair and Thornton's eerie upturned face came to my mind. I shook the memories off. There was a similarity between the events in the basement and the events in the den. The color had been sucked from both rooms. There was, of course, one notable difference. Unlike the room where Thornton had been killed, which was still white, in the basement the red had returned, and the man in the room was still alive, whereas Thornton was not. This begged an experiment. I withdrew my knife and approached one of the white curtains. I cut along the base of the fabric until I'd freed a square about twice the size of my hand. I folded it and slipped it into my pocket. I situated the curtain so the cut could not be seen. This piece of curtain I kept beneath my bed beside the plump rose. On a Monday evening, I waited once again until 15 minutes after Cyrus had left my room. Just a little after 11, I slinked down to the basement and stood outside the familiar door, the white fabric clutched in my hands. Like a messenger delivering an envelope, I carefully dropped the fabric to the ground and slid it under the door. Breathlessly, I watched. Within a few moments, the man arrived. The fabric disappeared. I bit my lip and pressed my ear against the door. Shuffling, perhaps, but that was all I could detect. Light flickered at my feet like a quiet fire was burning inside the room. A corner of fabric appeared in the light. I tugged it. The fabric was not glistening white platinum cloth, but rather two very light blue stripes and two brilliant gold ones. The brilliant hues shimmered at me beneath the yellow overhead bulb. "How do you do that?" I asked. "Who are you?" Silence. I pressed my ear against the door, listening hard for any detectable sound. Someone might be quietly breathing, but it also could have been my imagination. I folded the cloth and slipped it into my pocket. I turned around. Cyrus stood there, a red box in his hands. "What are you doing, Jack?" I gasped. He wasn't supposed to be in the house. He was supposed to be gone, wasn't he? I racked my brain trying to remember if I had actually seen him leave. I didn't know. There had been too many Mondays for me to remember. Under his gaze, I could barely contain these thoughts. In the weight of his presence, they evaporated. I shook my head, stammering. Cyrus stood inordinately still, his gaze as hard and unrelenting as a statue's. He squatted to my level, and though there were times when he had hugged me, tucked me into bed, kissed my forehead, was kind, there was no hint of those moments. It was like gazing into the eyes of a snake. "Where is my key card?" he asked. I reached into my back pocket and retrieved the white card. I held it up and he took it. His attention shifted from it to the door. "Who told you about this place?" "No one." "Then how did you find it?" Every muscle in my body tensed. My heart hurtled over my ribs. "I followed you one night." "Did you see what's beyond that door?" This question carried an immense weight. "No, but you wanted to." Slowly, I nodded. He stood again. "Are you not happy here?" "I am," I said, "because I'd hate for you to have to leave after all we have accomplished." I shook my head, gripping my hands into fists tight enough that my fingernails cut into my skin. No, I don't want to leave. And I would hate to have to begin again. It is very difficult for children so advanced in the process to begin again. "No," I said, terrified. "Then," he said with gritted teeth, "do not follow me or sneak through this house looking for treasures that do not belong to you. Do not steal from me." He lifted the key card. "I won't have anyone who lives here stealing from me." Warm tears slid down my cheek. "I won't steal from you," I said. "Believe me, you would not like it outside of this house." "I know, I'm sorry." I wiped my eyes with my palms and could no longer look into his frightening, unblinking gaze. "You will be punished for this, but right now I want you to go to bed." "Yes, Cyrus." I quickly stepped past his hunched form toward the exit, my footsteps sounding outrageously loud. I reached the exit to the wine room. Cyrus said, "Jack." I turned. He stood in front of the creature's door. "If I catch you down here again, that will be it." I gasped. "I won't." As I ascended the stairs out of the basement, an anguished scream reverberated through the air. I clapped my hands to my ears and hunkered on the steps, unable to move, waiting out the horrific noise. The sounds went on and on. It seemed the screaming would never end and that it was knocking me over, freezing me, hurting me. Suddenly, there were warm, comforting hands on my own. I opened my eyes and saw Roland. He lifted me up, telling me, "You don't need to be down here, not when Cyrus goes to harvesting." He set me on my feet and held my hand. Side by side, we escaped the shrieks that sapped all my energy. Outside the basement, Roland shut the door. The yelling continued, resonating beneath my feet, faint vibrations in the floorboards. It was almost like a wounded sheep was in the wood, wool between the slats. Roland scooted a chair from a nearby table across the floor, and I sat in it. He leaned on the table edge. "I can't stand that screaming," I told him, wiping tears from my face. "You want to know a secret?" he asked, his voice exceedingly kind. "Neither can I." This confused me. Roland was always solid, impermeable to weakness and moral throes. The look on his face said otherwise. All the muscles had collected inward. "If things weren't the way they were," he said, "well, I guess my point is I shouldn't have to hear those screams, and neither should you, because he shouldn't have to scream." "Why is he?" Roland winced. Cyrus doesn't want you down there, and he doesn't want you to know about that man. I won't be the one to endanger you by telling you. You have to understand." He held in a breath and paused. "What Cyrus is attempting here with you and Alex, he has never attempted before. There is no need to give him reason to think it was a mistake to keep you two in his home. He's just as willing to live without you as he is to live with you." He stood and held out his hand. "Come on." We left the small room, and the farther we walked, the less those vibrations stung my feet. When we reached the upper floor, Roland said, "Don't go down there anymore. Don't go seeking things in the basement. Don't test Cyrus again." I nodded slowly and thought about Cyrus's threat to send me where the other children were. It made me shiver. "I won't." Sensing we were about to part for the evening, I hugged Roland. He paused before returning the hug and squeezed me tight. When I pulled away, he smiled. "How is it that, no matter how dark or old or weary a man gets, a child can change him?" Roland asked. How is it that I am changing when for 50-some years I have been what I am? How am I regretting?" "What are you regretting?" I asked. He shook his head. "I love you, Roland," I said. "I love you more than I love Cyrus." "Jack," he replied, "I love you too, but don't ever say that again. Not in this house, not ever."